Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Hero Index podcast. I'm your host, Hero Index editor Marcus McNeil, joined here as always by film columnist David Murphy.
Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us.
All right, we got a good show packed for you today, too. Of course, the talk of the town right now is Spider-Man Homecoming, the latest installment from Marvel Studios in their new joint venture with Sony and Columbia Entertainment. Premiered this Friday, and we were able to see it. So this whole podcast is going to be dedicated to our thoughts and opinions and really views on Spider-Man Homecoming, what it means for both studios involved, and where it can go from here. I'm going to, of course, start this all out with David Murphy, who will have a spoiler review for Spider-Man Homecoming coming up on our YouTube channel here. Probably by the end of today, you'll be able to go there and check that out. David, what were your thoughts on Spider-Man Homecoming?
Disappointment, mainly. I was expecting something big from Marvel with this. It's their, before they kickstarted their MCU in 2008, and probably still to this day, he's their icon. He's their Batman and Superman combined, pretty much. And I expected a bit more than what is essentially a teenage Iron Man. And yeah, I just felt it was kind of inconsequential. I think I've already said it's lightweight. I suppose it maneuvers itself away from the shadow of Sam Raimi's films quite well, but unfortunately I found myself missing the kind of operatic sweep of those particular movies, certainly the first two. I mean, I understand that they want to go down the kind of friendly neighborhood Spider-Man route with this particular version, which is fine. I like the fact that they gave the audience credit in terms of awareness of the character. We don't see him getting bitten by a radioactive spider. It's not an origin story. There's not even a mention of Uncle Ben. Is he part of this particular Spider-Man's arc at all?
He is. And also, it feels really good. I understand Marvel's thought process in this and trying to not stick too close to the origins, but it's clearly something that affected Peter Parker very deeply. So I did think it was a little bit weird that we didn't get hardly a mention of Uncle Ben. His presence, or his lack of presence, does certainly loom, especially over Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei, but it's beyond subtle. It's very underplayed and doesn't seem to factor into Spider-Man's motivations really for anything in the film.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel as well are still bad at bad guys. There's nothing wrong with Michael Keaton's performance at all as Adrian Toomes, but he's just a mercenary making his living. All right, it's through illegal means, but it's and it's irresponsible and reckless. But it doesn't feel particularly dastardly or cutting.
Yeah, there's no grand master plan he's trying to unleash.
And then they completely neuter him by revealing that he's Liz's
spoilers, by
father.
the way. Spoilers.
Sorry, yes, spoilers. Spoiler warning.
For everybody out there listening right now, we're probably going to go into quite a bit of spoiler detail for Spider-Man Homecoming because I think it warrants it, and it's proven to be a big hit right now too. So
chances are you've seen it.
Spoiler warning is going to be up the entire episode. So if you haven't seen Homecoming yet, please pause this podcast, get around to seeing it, come back and revisit it because we'll be letting loose on all the details.
Yeah. So I mean, the problem is, and this is just, I found the fundamental weakness to the whole film is as soon as we see that, which is slightly telegraphed, by the way, as soon as the door opens when Peter's going to take her to the homecoming, I just knew whose face was going to be behind it. Mm-hmm. I think most people will. So that means the whole kind of key to me with Spider-Man, certainly in Raimi's mold anyway, was that he always had to pay a price for being Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He himself might be almost completely invulnerable, but those around him are not. And it's always the villains that go after his loved ones and so forth. And in this, so automatically his love interest is taken off the menu as far as the Vulture is concerned. And then the script kind of realises this. So immediately after that, meet and greet scene in the house, Toombs then threatens him and says, "Oh, I'm going to kill everyone you love," and all of this, and that's pretty much just leaves Aunt May, who I'm not even sure he has any awareness of. So and it's just Peter just never seems to really suffer any penalty for being Spider-Man. It's like he's cutting classes, but no one cares. He misses the decathlon final, but they win anyway. So it just feels, like I say, just inconsequential. It lacks agonizing dilemmas for the character, I think.
Which I think was definitely one of the strengths of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films is the good old Parker luck, which itself is a trope. You might be able to look that up, is that Peter Parker is just a hard luck hero, and nothing he does, no matter his intentions, will ever quite go right for him. I'm recalled of certain scenes, especially with, say, Dylan Baker in Spider-Man 2, where it's like, hey, if you don't get your shit together, Parker, I'm going to fail you. You're a brilliant kid, but, you have to be tuned into this. And I think that was the strength of his relationship with Otto Octavius, played by Alfred Molina in that movie, was that you really got the sense of both the stakes for both characters, and it kind of made both their falls all the more dramatic, and the things that tied them together all the more dramatic. Yeah. And I would kind of agree with you that Homecoming definitely feels more in the Marvel vein, where these heroes go through things, and I feel probably the only character in the MCU who this doesn't go for is Captain America, who very much so has to suffer for every decision that he makes and pay for the ultimate price a lot of times for those things. Peter didn't seem especially bogged down by the things that happened. That was definitely the tone of the movie. It was kept more upbeat and more light, probably coming off of the heels of something like Amazing Spider-Man 2. I definitely understand the reasoning for it. But my feelings personally, and I was talking to you a little bit before the show about it. This is probably the first time we differ quite a bit in our opinions on subject, and I'll go into details as to why. But I personally love this movie. It's right up there with Spider-Man 2 for me, and I completely understand why we have different opinions. This movie feels like, let's just call it what it is. It's Spider-Man fan service. If you grew up reading the comic books or watching the animated series, anything like that, any number of media, Marvel and John Watts made this movie for Spider-Man fans. It actually doesn't feel like, even with the ways we're discussing with Uncle Ben and things like that, going through his origin and everything, it makes a lot of assumptions about the audience, probably more so than any Marvel film that we've gotten from the studio thus far, in that it doesn't need to explain things or why things are a certain way. But in regards to how it's portrayed in Spider-Man, Peter Parker himself was pitch perfect from a lot of his interpretations in the comics. Some of the things that alluded to, there's plenty of Easter eggs and just a ton of things that, if you love the character as much as I did growing up, there are so many moments I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they put that in, or, oh, I understand what this is a reference to. I also understand the faults the movie had. The pace was, I would say, weird in certain places. I think the angle they were going for with the movie, having it be this John Hughesian sort of mishmash of that and a superhero film, was successful overall, but definitely led to moments of like, okay, could we have cut this out? Could we? There's probably a good 10 minutes that could have been trimmed out of this movie and made it a very much so tighter narrative. Go right ahead.
Could just interrupt. I do think it actually owed quite a lot to Matthew Vaughn's and Mark Millar's Kick-Ass.
Yeah.
Where a more sanitized version, obviously.
Definitely.
For the kids, but I did get that. I didn't get to include that in my review because I was running out of time, unfortunately, but I did. That is in my notes. I just remembered that I did write that while I was in the screening. But yeah, you're right. The John Hughes thing, that's on the nose as well because he's running through the gardens. Like
yeah, it was
Ferris
very
Bueller.
meta.
And then they actually show Ferris Bueller
Yes.
on a TV, and it's like, did you really need to? That was a bit patronising, I thought. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
And it was very in your face at that moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it's in the background. It was like at the front of the scene as we saw that. And I do think the last third of the movie, the final act of the movie, was pretty tight. I think I was thoroughly entertained for that portion. I think one of the things with some of the Marvel movies is that they do tend to trail off a little bit as in the third act, which is kind of indicative of the genre. You know, there's the trope of the blue beam of light shooting up into the sky, and you know what that entails for the story and how the things kind of fall apart after that. I do think since they had the more personal hook with this, with Spider-Man not only trying to stop the Vulture, but also trying to save the man who is the Vulture and, you know, look out for him as well. Felt like this is the first time we had stakes in quite some time. And I do like the fact that it wasn't this grand sort of thing like I'm going to take over the world and, you know, or destroy somebody or necessarily even kill anyone. The scene at the end with the plane, it was an unmanned plane with just technology on it. There was no stakes for that whatsoever. Even as the plane was crashing towards New York City or Coney Island, I think it ended on, there's no stakes of like, there's people in the way that needs to be saved. Spider-Man and Vulture were the only two characters involved with it, and everything with the interactions between them felt very real, I guess. I mean, the Vulture's just trying to get a payday, his last payday, and hang it up and not have to worry about crime or anything anymore, take care of his family. And Peter is driven much so by, you need to do the right thing for your family. Being a criminal and putting these weapons on the street is not what's gonna make them safe. I feel like that's really sort of resonant because so often with these movies we do get these sort of big grandiose plans from everyone that want to take over the world or destroy the planet, and we see throngs of people fleeing for their safety, everything like that. I did kind of like this movie just dialed that back for a second, just made it a personal moral struggle between the two characters. And actually, what did you think about Michael Keaton's portrayal as the Vulture? I think it was definitely a downplay. I kind of enjoyed the fact that he wasn't a cackling villain or anything like that. He kind of felt a little bit more realistic in that way than I thought they would have ever portrayed him.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a frustrated working Joe at the start of the film. It's a very honest performance. He doesn't go over the top, which Michael Keaton is capable of doing. We've obviously, you know, his big start was in Beetlejuice, and I can't think of many other more over the top performances than that, as brilliant as it was. Yeah, I thought it was fine. It was the minimum that I expect from him, really. Mm-hmm. And I get what you're saying. Maybe I didn't pick up on that so much, that he's kind of a Walter White type character to some degree. He is a villain, but he's a human villain,
right?
A bit like, yeah. I mean, maybe we're not so used to that in the comic book genre. I don't know though. I think maybe the film would have worked possibly just as well without a main villain. Just could have had Spider-Man going around sorting out local infractions and stuff like that, because it does seem to be very much based on him. It's thoroughly recast itself in a millennial mold. I didn't think I'd ever get to see a film in my life where the inciting incident that starts everything moving in terms of Peter is a friend comes round to build a Lego Death Star. But that's what... Yeah. But then again, I suppose Lego is everywhere now. It's as important to the corporate landscape of the 21st century as Coca-Cola was.
Actually, I have my TIE Fighter right here on my desk, so I'm not in a position to say anything in regards to Ned Leeds building a Death Star.
And yeah, there's lots of social media stuff. Obviously, the first time we get to see Peter is him vlogging his trip to is it Germany that the Civil War battle takes place in. And obviously, the challenge for Peter isn't really so much. I mean, obviously, it is defeating the Vulture as well, but it's getting Tony Stark's seal of approval, so he can join the Avengers. So maybe you can help me out on this a bit, because I think I was too busy thinking about how I was going to write my review by the time the end of the film rolled around. But why did he turn down Tony Stark at the end? Which obviously leaves a nice shiny suit for Sony to get some, shall we say, mileage out of the franchise.
Definitely.
Once Marvel are done with it.
It's very much so an allusion to many things. Spider-Man has always been an interesting character for Marvel because he was always the, sorry for the pun here, he was always the connective thread between many aspects of their universe. I mean, even his first issue of his comic, Spider-Man #1, the first thing he does is seek out the Fantastic Four to get help with them. He's always the guy who's the go-between between the street-level vigilantes akin to Daredevil and Luke Cage, and then the big hitters like the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. And he's always struggled with his place in the world. Of course, being a poor kid from Queens, he was always at the mind state of that he didn't deserve to be with those people. Even much so, the main theme of Spider-Man Homecoming is his own self-worth and validation and what he is trying to accomplish, his self-esteem. So him rejecting Tony Stark is actually things that happened in the comics before, where the Avengers extended him an invitation to join. He said, "No, I'm here to look out for the little guy. That's my place in the world." And actually, when we first meet this version of Spider-Man in Civil War, the first thing Tony asks him is, "So why do you do this? Looking out for the little guy?" And Peter says, "Well, yeah. It's kind of what motivates him is that he knows that there's grander things to do, and of course, he would love to be an Avenger, have everything that comes along with that. But I think through dealing with the Vulture, which had very personal stakes for him, he understands that he's needed in his community. These are the people they need to protect him because, as Michael Keaton had pointed out to him as a Vulture, of course, nobody's down here looking out for the little guy. The whole reason the Vulture existed was because he felt pushed aside compared to with another spoiler alert here, Tony Stark, who funds and initiates damage control, starts edging out these independent contractors who are responsible for cleaning up after things like the Chitauri invasion and the Triskelion destruction that we saw in Winter Soldier, and really kills their business, takes food off of their table, puts their families in tough positions. And his motivation is that he felt like this world didn't care about us. And I think over the time, Spider-Man started to sort of share those sentiments, and he even had moments with Tony Stark, who wasn't present in the Iron Man suit, rather interacting with him by proxy, controlling the suit remotely. And Peter says, "Hey, you can't even be bothered to show up here and talk to me." So Peter very much so feels like he needs to be the person who's looking out for people down here. The Avengers can handle what they handle, but the neighborhood needs a Spider-Man, and that's the person he wants to be. Another Easter egg here is that this also alludes to the Civil War comics, where Tony introduces Peter to a press conference and introduces him as a member of the Avengers, and Peter Parker reveals his secret identity to the entire world and says, "I believe in the Registration Act," which in the MCU is the Sokovia Accords, and fully becomes a public superhero for the first time. And of course, that got retconned terribly. Won't go into any details about that at all. But it was a moment for us to realize that, we got introduced to him as being a portion of the Avengers, and much of the film was dedicated to him trying to prove himself worthy of being an Avenger. But at the end of the day, Peter Parker's a grounded kid who's going to look out for the people close to him first before he worries about anything else. And the ending of the movie was illustrating that.
Okay, so that's cleared up. I also just felt there was a big J.K. Simmons-sized hole in the film as well.
I was hoping so much for a post-credit scenes or something where they brought J.K. back. Of course, he had made comments about it in the past. He would always come back, and of course, every fan on the planet wants him to come back. There's been few roles more perfectly cast than him as J. Jonah Jameson, and he was sorely missed, I believe, in this film.
And the post credits scene where Michael Keaton's in, again spoilers, is incarcerated, and he has that quick conversation with the guy from Better Call Saul. I've forgotten the name of the actor, and also Far Cry 3.
Oh, that's that where I recognize him from. I knew
Yes.
he looked familiar for some reason.
Yes, he's Voss in Far Cry 3, and yeah, he plays a major part in Netflix's, AMC's in your country, Better Call Saul.
And of course, another spoiler here for him. He plays Matt Gargan, which comic fans know as the Scorpion, is his alter ego. So we already see a little bit of Marvel building towards the sort of Sinister Six introduction that
that's what
Sony was initially going for.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, because he says we're getting some guys together to get, the Spider, as it were. So I presume that's giving Sony some license to move forward with their villains.
I think so. Yeah.
Obviously not Venom, because he hasn't arrived yet. The symbiont being hasn't. We haven't seen that. I presume that's going to be covered in Sony's little exploits, which we're still unsure whether that fits it. Well, we've been told now it doesn't fit into the MCU. So I suppose that's probably what we should discuss next, really, is where does this leave? I think Marvel have pretty much, ploughed their field now. We know what they're going to do with Spidey for the time being, but where does this leave Sony Pictures with their...
Well, Sony is in an interesting position here. Box office figures for Spider-Man Homecoming just came out about an hour or so, too. $117 million domestic opening, very, very good. $257 million global opening, which is absolutely fantastic. So this is gonna probably be a $1 billion movie for Sony. So I'm sure they're probably popping the champagne right now and probably feeling very confident in where they're gonna go forward with this. This could get played two ways. They could either take this as Marvel really nailed it and is getting great reception from critics and fans alike, and of course the box office receipts too. It's a solid hit for them, which the studio is desperately needed. So it could be a cause for them to say, okay, Marvel, you know what you're doing. Just lead us to the promised land. Whatever you guys need to do with the character and with these films, you have our complete blessing and agreement. And of course, this being the movie industry, it could go this way as well too. Sony could say, oh shit, we just made a ton of money off of this. Spider-Man, everything, greenlight, all these weird projects that we got in the pipeline. Let's just keep these movies pumping out in as quick succession as we can. Ride this wave straight to the bank and do everything they can to build up their Spider-Verse they're working on. So it's really difficult to say which way they're going to take it. I think historically, as we've seen, Sony does not have the best reservation and the best methodology to going about franchises out of everything. They're very much so, they're the classic sort of Hollywood studio where they want to make movies their way. They want to produce them their way. And if they really want to make the movie, they make the movie. I mean, Venom itself is something they've been gestating with for years and years and years now, way back to Spider-Man 3, which even back then they were mulling over possibly doing a solo Venom film too. So I don't think this success is going to curtail them. I think it's probably going to have the opposite effect. They're probably going to be a little bit more cocky in how they approach these Spider-Man universe films outside of Marvel Studios going forward. I do think they are going to let Marvel do what they need to, and we're going to discuss a little bit of this too after we comment on possible reactions from Sony. I think you'd be hard pressed to blame them for doing so, but I think they do need to have some sort of reservations about using this goodwill they built back and now have this solid Spider-Man and solid hit film under their belt now to really take their time and approach things the right way and build up a very sort of holistic shared universe instead of this fractured pastiche thing that they have going right now.
Yeah, we've discussed this a few times now about the deal that
seems like a weekly thing. We have to talk about this.
Hopefully, after this week, we can leave it alone for a
hopefully.
while. But yeah, I mean, at some point they're going to have to make their own Spider-Man. That's going to be the what's the word I'm looking for? It's just that's going to be when they're really going to be tested. Now, you've mentioned it before, and I think it's probably the most logical way for them to go is to bring in Miles Morales for their Spider-Man.
Which was actually, once again, was teased in the movie. Donald Glover, who played the character of Aaron Davis, aka the Prowler, in the Spider-Man universe, old school Spider-Man villain he was, mentioned he has a nephew in this area and he doesn't want these guns on the street when he decided to help out Spider-Man. His nephew is Miles Morales, so he's at the very least been alluded to existing in the MCU already.
Yeah, so I think that would be a smart way to go. The problem is they can't do it really in terms of without dividing audience attention, whilst Marvel still have Spider-Man under their control. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult because Marvel have got Spider-Man for the 2 next Avengers films and 1 more solo outing. We think, is that correct?
2 more solo outings, yeah.
2 more solo outings?
Yep.
Right. So probably not until 2020, 2021 are Marvel going to be finished with him. So that's a long time. That's a long time for Sony to wait to bring in their own Spider-Man. But do you think that both Peter Parker and Miles Morales could exist at the same time and audiences will still take to both of them?
I don't think they can. And then, of course, what I just mentioned, too, that kind of screws the pooch for Sony as well because, okay, they can't quite take that because now, in a lot of fans' head, we understand that Miles Morales exists in the MCU, so if Sony makes a movie with Miles Morales that doesn't take place in the MCU, they're kind of screwed on that, too. I think Sony's best option is probably, if they're dead set on making their Spider-Verse, so to speak, which honestly they shouldn't really do. They have every right with owning the Spider-Man rights to produce films, but I don't there's nothing stopping them from saying, hey, Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, want to come on as producers for this. You don't necessarily have to be involved with the plotting and everything like that, but sort of like how we heard with Man of Steel, Christopher Nolan was godfathering the project and kind of taking Zack Snyder under his wing, and a lot of good that did, unfortunately. Actually, now that I go back and thinking about it, Christopher Nolan made a number of suggestions to Zack Snyder to change Man of Steel, and all those suggestions were the exact things that were gripes about the movie, that had he listened to Christopher Nolan, it would have been received quite a bit better. So go figure there, Christopher Nolan actually knew what he was talking about. Who'd have known? I think they have to say, like, okay, if this is what we want to do, and we do want to make multiple movies featuring Spider-Man characters, there's nothing to stop them from talking to Marvel and say, hey, can we put these in the MCU? We'll take notes from you guys, wherever the case is going to be, or if we produce them solo-wise, how can we do that aside from it and have it possibly be able to backdoor into the whole deal? Because right now, Marvel Studios doesn't have anything to do with Venom or any other, or Black Cat, Silver Sable, any of the other films they might have planned. So they're kind of on their own with it, and we can't really at this point trust them to get a good project off the ground, because they haven't had one in quite some time at this point. So I think it would be much more beneficial to them if they did try to just keep everything in the MCU. Why they wouldn't just want to continue to build off of an already incredibly established movie universe while they have this partnership scene. It seems like this sort of stuff was made in spite of Marvel, is the whole thing that bothers me with this, is that okay, we have to share Spider-Man with him because we got to get this character back in good stance. But well, we can do our own Spider-Man films and they'll be just as good. We'll make our own Spider-Man universe and we don't need them. Nah, stop it.
No,
Stop it. Just- it's
don't
like
kid yourself.
yeah, don't kid yourself. It's like, reminds me of when Blockbuster decided they're going to put out their own, streaming service to compete with Netflix, and they slowly and surely died soon
Yeah.
thereafter. Sometimes you just got to know when you're beat and give it up from there. Form those partnerships while they're available, because you never know in the future. Someday, Disney, I think, when Disney was possibly inquiring about the Spider-Man rights, it was never anything official, but I think the number that Sony threw out was something along the lines of $5 billion they wanted for the rights to Spider-Man, which, I mean...
It's a snip, really,
Yeah.
for Disney these days.
Yeah, but then when you think about it, I think they paid, what, $2 or $3 billion for all of Marvel, maybe $2 or $3 billion for Star Wars from Lucasfilm.
They paid around $4 billion.
Yeah, and the potential for Spider-Man is nowhere near the returns for the Star Wars franchise.
No, they'd probably only break even on it overall.
Mhm.
Plus, something we discussed in a podcast, which will be coming later this week, is we don't know how strong the legs are for the comic book genre over the next 10 years. We won't get back into that again, though. But yeah, I can see your logic there. But from Sony's point of view, yeah, absolutely, that's the price tag they should be charging, really.
I think it's also a thing too, because Sony does not actually have the rights for any Spider-Man merchandising. Spider-Man is the top merchandising of any comic book character in the world. He outgrosses probably the next 2 or 3 combined. That's all owned by Marvel, by the way. So the most profitable wing of the Spider-Man business, Marvel already owns it. So negotiation-wise, Sony didn't have a whole lot to go off of with that.
No, it's not too much leverage there. That's
No.
true.
So, actually, one thing I want to discuss is with this, which the thing about Spider-Man: Homecoming, it feels like the most Marvel Studios-y Marvel movie that we've gotten so far. It very much so really ingrains itself in the MCU, probably more so than any other movie we've seen from them. I mean, there's entire, like, I think people have web series out right now of all the Easter eggs and everything packed into this film. And it's clear, and we see a lot of parallels. Of course, you mentioned too with the Iron Man movies, and of course having Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. in the movie too. It feels very much so a passing of the torch. How we had these parallels between him and Iron Man, and then we hear that going forward after Avengers 4, and this is from the man Kevin Feige at Marvel Studios himself. Spider-Man is going to be the linchpin of the MCU as we transition away from the old guard, which was Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, into this new crop of heroes, where Spider-Man's going to take the lead on that. Is it a wise decision for Marvel, which by all means, Sony still owns this character? Is it a good move for them to kind of put their faith of really their entire film franchise in this deal they have with Sony and make Spider-Man the crucial character of the MCU going into 2020 and beyond?
Well, I wonder how much this has got to do with how much the traditional Avengers cast is getting paid. Because Robbie Downey Jr. apparently is set to make $250 million.
Yeah, he's got Scrooge McDuck sort of money right now.
off of the next Avengers film, and if that equals the box office of the previous Avengers film, that's a quarter of the revenue pretty much. So I think it could well be as much of a creative decision as it is a business one.
Mm-hmm.
Because no doubt Tom Holland is not getting Robert Downey Jr. money from his role, and the thing is those cast members are synonymous. I mean, there's no one else now who can play Tony Stark. It would be absolute lunacy.
Yeah, they just have to completely retire the character or bring a new character into that role.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they've got other people in suits. They've had Don Cheadle and Terrence Howard as War Machine. But yeah, I do wonder how much that's playing a part in it. It's another phase from Marvel, but once they're done with Spider-Man, you do kind of have to wonder. But you have to kind of wonder what they're left with. But then again, they started their universe with a character that had minimal audience awareness back in 2008, and it was a huge hit. It was only just beaten at the box office by Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight,
right?
Which at the time was the most successful comic book film to date. But still, Iron Man made $800 million or something like that, which is titanic money for
an unknown quantity. Yeah,
for an unknown quantity. Yeah. So there's no reason why they just can't do the same with Black Panther. Or, I mean, I'm sure you've got far greater knowledge of the characters they can start bringing back in or introducing. So they've just got a lot of options, really, but it depends on the sustainability of the genre by that stage. It could well be that by the time, by the time that they decide, well, their deal expires with Sony, it could well be these films are just not making the same amount of money, so they can just it makes more sense for them to start concentrating on smaller characters anyway. So yeah, I think it makes sense really on a lot of levels, and I think again Marvel are showing. While I'm not happy with the current quality of their films, I think it's been a long time since they've done anything really special. The Avengers is now starting to feel like a very long time ago, and that was for me the last kind of complete Marvel film that you felt, yeah, they couldn't really have done much more with that. I've got a bit more time for Doctor Strange than I think most people did, but I wasn't too impressed with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I've said it towards the end of my review, I just feel like they're placeholders now. It's just, they're just churning out these films. The formula's getting more apparent.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and their weaknesses are becoming more apparent and their strengths not so much so anymore. I do like how set in the Marvel Universe this is. I think outside of the Captain America films, we generally just get an inkling that we're in the Marvel Universe, but in this one, it feels very much
it's a living, breathing entity. Yeah,
yes. Yeah, and maybe if they can keep that up, that will help smooth things over. But they have to get a bit more innovative with what they're doing, a bit smarter. The set pieces are starting to feel a bit routine. I've not seen anything particularly clever or spectacular from them for a while. And though I did like, again, Doctor Strange, I did like the style that they introduced into that kind of acid flashback type thing. But yeah, they're in danger of running out of steam if they don't up their game a little bit. But does it matter?
And of course, they're attempting to. You can say that right now because we see the receipts right now for Spider-Man: Homecoming. These movies are not losing momentum in the least bit. Audiences are continuing to gobble them up in droves and be very happy with them. Of course, they got the biggest of the big coming up with Avengers: Infinity War, which Marvel is looking to just continually push the spectacle. And now we're kind of seeing, along with this, some of the other films, Spider-Man: Homecoming, Thor: The Dark World, that these films are starting to come sort of these mishmashes where we're not necessarily so much as following the story of one particular character. We're getting these sort of team-up combo MCU movies that kind of get a couple of plot lines through. And of course, we saw, even here in Spider-Man: Homecoming, what we see in the movie has a fair amount of ramifications for Iron Man too. Another spoiler alert here, we see Pepper Potts come back and it alludes to the fact that they're getting engaged and will be married. So even in a Spider-Man movie, we're still getting development for the Iron Man character. And this can both be a benefit and a problem going forward, because now are we expected to just get a singular narrative from each one of their movies, or do they have to continually sort of combine multiple characters together and keep things going that sort of way? But in regards to Sony and actually really Marvel making Spider-Man the linchpin of the MCU going forward into the future, I always think, taking the time and really kind of gauging to see how this relationship with them as Sony is going to work. I think it is a little risky hinging at all on this particular deal, but we sort of mentioned in our previous podcast too that Marvel's starting to fill themselves a little bit, and they're starting
Yeah.
to exert their dominance over Sony in this regard. It sort of kind of feels like they almost have a gun to their head in a certain way and say, "Hey, we know what we're doing with this character. You're about to reap all of this money. You just let us roll with it and count the checks, and everything's gonna be fine from here." Uh, it's just that as we change, and I think it has to because, of course, Robert Downey Jr. is no spring chicken. I think Chris Hemsworth and Chris Evans can play their roles for a while. They're still fairly young and able to be Captain America and Thor for a long time, but yeah, they have to change it up in some regards. And when you get a character back as big as Spider-Man, you can't just push him to the background. Of course, for Marvel for a long time, Spider-Man was their mascot. He is their Mickey Mouse. He's their marquee character.
Sure.
So, of course, they're going to put him to the forefront. But I guess it's going to be a wait-and-see approach of if this potentially goes wrong in any sort of respect. And it's all really going to hinge on how Sony approaches these films outside of the MCU, how those perform, and what they do. I think if Venom comes out and it's a shit film and people trash it, they will quickly abandon all hopes that they have for that and just stick with the MCU related Spider-Man films and scuttle any ideas for a shared universe that they have. So we see here that Spider-Man Homecoming is definitely, I don't want to say it was a formulaic movie. It was formulaic in regards to the MCU. I actually think they did try a little bit different take. I think because they have a younger cast and a younger character, and they could go for a more youthful appeal. I do think it was sort of different in that regard, but we did see a lot of similar MCU beats pop up in this movie. What can Marvel kind of start doing to differentiate their projects from one another? Of course, we got things like Black Panther, Captain Marvel coming up in the future. But if they keep running with these similar sort of hooks, is that something that at this point it looks like the audiences want? But from an artistic standpoint, should they be looking to possibly look at characters or creative talent directors that can bring something new to the MCU to add some different layers to it?
Yeah, I definitely think they could probably do with a few more auteurs getting on board in terms of and allowing. But it's just so interweaved now, isn't it? It's very difficult.
Yes.
I mean, probably the first review I've ever written for you, I made no comment on the direction in Spider-Man: Homecoming purely because I felt it was utterly unremarkable in any manner at all. It's not bad direction. In fact, it's very competent, but there's never anything extraordinary happening. And yeah, I think we could do with some more out there interpretations of the characters. I mean, I'm maybe not sure they need to go as far as something like Logan, which felt quite divorced from its own universe, despite familiar faces being in it. But it is difficult to know how to shake it up without capsizing this huge Titanic boat that they've built.
Yeah,
is going to be very, very tough. And I think once they start to see their films tail off in terms of box office, it's something they're probably going to have to approach. But you have to wonder at that point whether they're going to be able to maneuver quickly enough without, destroying what they've already built. It's going to be very, very difficult for them. I don't know. I'd like to see something a bit more. I'd like to see something a bit darker in the Marvel universe. I know it's can be a risky route to take a character down. We got a much darker Superman in the DCEU, and that's not working.
And of course, Marvel has no shortage of characters they can use for that either.
Sure.
And of course, we see this very dark tinged world with the Netflix properties, but those are still, they take place in the MCU, but film-wise, they might as well not exist in accordance to the grand scheme of things for Marvel. This is one of the things, too, I know it's been a topic of discussion for a lot of people, but I really think some of the greatest potential they have is with a Black Widow solo film.
Sure.
I think she has a very interesting, very dark origin. They don't necessarily have to get into all of that, but I'm intrigued by these characters, and I think why many people consider Captain America: The Winter Soldier the best Marvel movie they've really released so far. A lot of people put it over even Avengers, is that it kind of added this duplicity and layeredness to the MCU, where for the first time it wasn't just a sort of black and white good versus evil conflict. Of course, it was in many regards, but it was a whole who can you trust, what's the right thing
Sure.
to do, a lot of parallels with say the war on terror and modern politics and things like that, making this sort of spy thriller movie set in MCU, which I thought was a really solid take. And from there on, I thought maybe this is a direction they should go in more often, is having these films. Okay, yeah, they're in the MCU, but they don't have to necessarily be MCU films. You can have an isolated Black Widow movie where you just deal with her in a particular mission. You can have an isolated Captain America story or Winter Soldier story. I think this is one of the reasons I'm getting really excited for Black Panther, because from the looks of it, it really doesn't have this greater ramifications for the MCU. It's very tied into T'Challa, the Black Panther, and what happens in Wakanda, and we don't have to do a whole lot of world building or lead up into Avengers Infinity War or anything like that. It just gets to be its own sort of film, which in many regards, even things that felt like they should stand aside a little more, like Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, were still very much so tied into the greater Avengers universe. I want to see more of that. I would like to see Marvel go in horror directions, like any sort of thing to really add another layer of creativity, and then sort of alternative styles and views to the feel that a lot of the movies have right now.
Yeah, I think they need to raise the stakes a bit as well. I think they do need to actually kill off a major character. I think that would add something to it. I mean, obviously we've got Thor Ragnarok coming up, which does seem to be more of a diversion than something. But obviously what we're seeing at the moment. Obviously,
and if Infinity War plays anything like the comics too, we're going to see a lot of people buying this. We hear about this change, and it could possibly be because a lot of the characters aren't going to make it out alive in that movie. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes too.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I presume they're going to try and bring. I mean, when are they going to bring the Guardians of the Galaxy into the fold proper?
They will be the co-stars of Avengers Infinity War, so it'll be sort of Avengers / Guardians of the Galaxy matchup too. And one of the things that has me excited for that is seeing, I think there's a set video released not long ago with Tom Holland, Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Pratt as Star-Lord all together on a set together, filming a scene together. And I was thinking, actually, can the camera handle that much snark at the same time? That's all that exists together. But it's also very cool to see the culmination of the universe they developed so far, all these corners of the MCU coming together and making one movie out of it.
Yeah, I think possibly something the MCU has mishandled since the Avengers is this kind of overarching threat of Thanos, which obviously the Guardians of the Galaxy have been left with the duty of fulfilling. But yeah, he's been a bit too. I mean, obviously we got that crucial shot right in the post credits of the Avengers, but we've not really seen him in any of the other Avengers films since, unless I'm misremembering. Has he been behind anything else since then, apart from in Guardians?
No, not a whole lot. So it's
I think
one of those.
It feels a bit like something that I put into my Doctor Who review this week of the last season. It feels a bit like that kind of thing. Like, oh, we've mentioned him now, so just keep remembering that. But 10 films on,
we'll come back to him. 10 years later. Oh, now he's here. Yeah. He was always kind of. I mean, I think all the Infinity series of the comic books were his major things, but it wasn't like him being such a grand threat isn't something that you can pull out. Oh, this issue Spider-Man battles Thanos. No, there's
No, that
there's
would
a
have been
number.
ridiculous, but yeah.
Yeah. But let's just skip ahead now. I mean, I think Spider-Man is definitely worth checking out if anybody is on the fence of seeing it. I think it's definitely go see it. Is really can't miss in terms of the MCU. But yeah, it's getting a solid reception now, and ticket sales are strong. It's going to be in theaters a long time. My personal recommendation is to see it, and don't let David deter you. I think you still gave it a positive review overall, right?
Yeah, you haven't seen it yet, have you? I haven't sorted it by any stretch, but I think, in all honesty, if you're not that invested in the MCU, I'd just recommend watching Spider-Man 1 or 2 again. Frank, I don't think you're missing out on much. I think as long as you've seen Civil War and you know what this new Spider-Man's personality is like, yeah, it's pretty. It's
kind of true.
We're not agreeing on this. It's pretty.
Yeah, well, I kind of agree though. At least in that respect, if you're looking at the next grand chapter in the MCU, yeah, Spider-Man: Homecoming doesn't have a lot of stakes like that. It's definitely a episode you can skip and get back to. But if you're a Spider-Man fan, I would say is worth checking out. Siskel and Ebert style is probably a thumbs up, thumbs down between the two of us right now.
A thumb halfway up, just
halfway up, like just leveled.
Yeah.
Usually we go through a little bit of comic book movie news or sci-fi news in the grand scheme of things now, but we really don't have a whole lot this week to discuss. I know
slow
one thing
week,
that pretty slow. Of course, Spider-Man has dominated so far. One interesting thing I think that did develop is that it looks like the Hellboy reboot, courtesy of director Neil Marshall, and actually the series creator, his name escapes me right now. God, I'm gonna get flayed alive. Forget this. Mike Mignola. My bad. Mike Mignola, who was the creator of Hellboy. They're going to move forward their R-rated reboot of the Hellboy movie franchise. It's going to be very much more so horror inspired, more closer to the dark roots than the Guillermo del Toro films that we got, which are pretty cool, by the way.
Yeah, I like them.
Yeah, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a cool thing to see Hellboy coming back in this new iteration?
Well, I don't think the Del Toro films are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They are very creative, and he's definitely left his thumbprints all over them. I can't see anyone but Ron Perlman filling the role again. I'm going to be very interested to see if they either. I presume they're not going to pick him back up for it, because that's generally the way that things go these days. Which was actually something I wanted to mention about Spider-Man in relation to music themes. But never mind, it's too late now. I think we've moved past that. I think there's an article in there, which I'll suggest to you in a while. But it could be fun. But yeah,
which, by the way, looks like David Harbour from Stranger Things will be in the role of Hellboy in the movie. That's actually a bit of casting I'm pretty keen on. Yeah, so he's very much still of that gruff kind of tough guy role as we are accustomed to with Ron Perlman having inhabited the role before.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I can see that working. It's another comic book character coming back. We are approaching a point of saturation now. There's room for improvement on the originals, but I think it's whether they can make them a bit more cohesive. They were a bit scattershot. Del Toro's he's so interested in monsters and fantastical things, which is to his credit most of the time.
Yeah, and actually, goes into Hellboy as well. I think at the time, Guillermo del Toro really sounded like a perfect match for it. I do think the movies came out a little bit more clean than probably gave proper service to the comics with. It sounds like this one is going to be a lot more faithful to the comic books, and I hope they kind of stick with that, especially the very irreverent kind of humor with the Hellboy movies too. I would have been like really down for somebody like say Edgar Wright doing
that would
doing
work.
this movie, this reboot, because
Yeah.
I just think the tone of Mike Mignola's stories and art and everything, it has that same sort of irreverence and also this sort of genre bending mashup sort of things that Edgar Wright excels at really well. I think he would have been cool at it. Of course, Neil Marshall made The Descent, pretty solid movie there. Of course,
He's also
directed
been
a number of
responsible
episodes.
Yes, you were about to say it. Game of Thrones, yeah. Some
Yeah,
of the
Game of
more
Thrones.
notable episodes, yeah.
And I think he actually doesn't get enough credit for his Friday the 13th reboot too, which was weird because I think that was a fairly solid film, and then I think they're trying to reboot that again right now for some stupid reason, but because we need more backstory on Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just in comic overload at the moment. I think as soon as I hear another comic book's coming back, it's like there are other comic books that haven't been turned into films yet. At least maybe let's try them before.
For the time being, I think we're actually getting real skimpy into what hasn't been adapted yet. Come these days, it's really kind of dominating the cycle, and it feels weird because I feel like these movies are sort of the new sci-fi in a way. It seems like we're not getting the amount of science fiction movies we used to. I think this year we had really the high-profile ones was Life.
Which was all right.
Yeah, Alien Covenant. Less said about that, the better. And then we have Valerian coming up here this month too, and then that's kind of really it for the week, unless you count Geostorm, courtesy of Gerard Butler. But I'm not looking forward to that. Yeah, not at all. I don't think you'll have to be worrying about reviewing that one this year.
No.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Of course, we're going to have a further discussion about that later on in the week. So Wednesday, look for a podcast to drop for us really discussing the comic book movie genre and the future of it in its current state right now. But it looks like for today, that's just going to about do it for us. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and of course be sure to subscribe on iTunes, on Stitcher. Keep on listening. We'll keep on making these things. David, thanks for coming back again.
No problem. Glad to be here.
All right, and everybody be sure to check out David's sort of okay-ish review on Spider-Man Homecoming that we got on the YouTube channel. But like I said, I think everything with this film is pretty solid, and I think Dave is definitely warranted in some of his criticisms for the film too. That's going to do it for us for this week. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you later.